All right, so let's get started. Let's go to the VS Code, and for our convenience, let's close everything. So this is the repository that we looked at last time, 3 months ago. Yeah, I've been slacking because I am busy with other stuff, and I'm also a little bit occupied with learning other things, as you might have saw in my last videos. But yeah, I wanted to continue with this because I didn't want to just abandon it. And yeah, in this video we're going to be covering the reframe 0.2.0. So this is the first, this version came out back in 2015. And for our convenience, I have copied everything inside the app namespace. So everything is over here. And we are also using it over here. So let's go over this code base. So app.view, if you look at the app, we have two things. We have a button that increments this value, and when you click on it, it calls the RF. Actually, let's go from the top. So we have app.view namespace, and then we are requiring three dependencies: the reagent core, reagent atom, we are referring the reaction, and then we have the app.reframe.core as reframe. And finally, after that, we have declared our initial state. So it's a map, and the value is a map of counter of 0. And following that, we have invoked the register handler. Now keep in mind, this is when this code was written, register event DB did not exist, or register event effects. So this was how reagent or reframe looked back in the day. Now this API obviously does not make sense in this time, but this is how it looked like. So if you look at the way how I called it, it's very similar to how register event DB works, because in register event effects you get the coeffects map rather than the database value. But here we get the reference to the DB, and in this function we are just updating the counter value by 1, right? So when I click on this, it runs this function, and right below that is the init event, and then here we are just setting our initial state, so this map over here. And right after that we are dispatching, so RF core dispatch. So we are calling this function over here. Probably might want to call the dispatch sync. So the difference between dispatch and dispatch sync is dispatch runs asynchronously, dispatch sync, well, runs synchronously. And that's all about registering event handlers and how to use. So register handler is how you register an event handler, and dispatch sync is how you use, and it accepts a vector, and you pass the event ID. So the next step is to define our subscriptions. So instead of register reg sub, which is the which is how it is defined now, but it was called. So the next is register sub. Register sub registers subscription handlers. So it accepts a subscription ID and then a function, and the function you get reference to the DB. And notice this function is not pure because you are wrapping over with a reaction. And obviously this is now how it is done now, but this is how it was done back in the day. So the reaction is obviously I'm importing from reagent atom, and if I run this, if I call this subscribe on counter, this is gonna give me nothing because I'm not connected to the REPL. But if I invoke now, it should give me 5, and if I click on this now, it should be 10. And finally, the app function is just a button, and then it has a on-click handler, and then when you click on it, it increments the value, and then we are using the subscribe function to get the value of the counter. So this is the very basic example. Now, just high level, just comments, right? What are some of the things that I noticed? First is obviously these two functions, right? Now, register event, register handler does not exist, but this is very similar to register event, which would be db, right? The dispatch and dispatch sync is very similar. It is still how it works now. Register sub, right? This is not pure. First of all, we have to call the reaction every single time. So if we have like 10 subscription handlers, then we have to call this reaction function 10 times. So obviously, from hindsight, this is not a good design. Again, there's a lot of it's very easy to criticize and talk about something that already existed. So it's very easy for me to talk about it because I've already seen all the solutions, right? Like what's going to be next and how it can be improved. We have already seen that but this is in the past. But you learn a lot, right? You learn how the subscription function evolved. Well, you don't know that, but now you know that it has evolved. But how? Well, we'll see in the upcoming episodes. And so subscription handlers returned a reaction, and we call this reaction explicitly ourselves. And then the subscribe function is the same, right? When you call this, it accepts a vector with the subscription ID, and then it returns a reaction. And then if you can deref the reaction. Reaction is very similar to how reagent atom works. It actually, reagent atom is itself is a reaction. And then, yeah. So next, let's go to the code base and see what's inside it. So the first thing when you are looking at a code base is to use the code, right, to understand how it works. So since we have already done that, let's go and see the implementation. So we'll go to core.cljs, and this is it. So this is the official reframe 0.2, and it is 39 lines of code, and this namespace has 4 dependencies: the handlers, the subs, routers, and middlewares. Now, without even looking at the code, right, we can guess what it does, right? For example, we know what middleware does. So middleware is a higher order function, right? It is mostly popular in backend systems. So if you're writing RESTful API, I'm sure you must have heard about middlewares that accept a handler and then it modifies the request. The job of this is also very similar. Instead of handling the request object, it makes sure that the handlers for handling events are small. So middleware, they handle the cross-cutting concerns. So that's middleware. Router is so if you look at how it is used, router exposes 2 functions, the dispatch and dispatch sync, and both of these functions accepts a vector with the event ID. So if you think about it, you can only call functions that have been registered. So there is probably a mechanism to save all that information somewhere, and which we will get into it pretty soon. So yeah, router is responsible for routing the request, the event request, right? If that makes sense. It calls the dispatch, which calls the I don't know, we'll see. And we have the subs. It exposes two functions, the register and subscribe, which we have already seen over here, right? So first we do register. Oh, register sub. So we have renamed the register to register sub, and then subscribe is subscribe. So we have seen both of these. And finally, we have all the middleware. So currently there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 middlewares, and these are all coming from middleware namespace. And finally, we have the register handler, right? And register handler is calling the register base from handler namespace, and then it accepts the event ID and the handler. And look at this one, the middleware, right? If usually when I called this, what happened is it called the handlers register base event ID, and then it added the pure middleware, which is this one over here, and handler. Now the next step is to see what happens. So the way how I like to understand about the code base is to create scenarios, right? So the first scenario could be in the context of using this library. So the first scenario is I'm registering the register handlers, so this guy over here, and so you want to see how this function behaves, what it does. So we are calling this function over here, and then this is calling the handlers, which is coming from here, and this one calls the register handler, right? Which is, sorry, the register base. And if you look at the event ID, so it probably calls this one, right? And so event ID, so here it is calling the ID, pure, and handler. So for example, here what we are doing is we are getting the event ID, middleware, and handler function. So first thing we are doing is we are calling the composed middleware, which is this guy over here. And since this guy is, let's see what it is, type of pure, it's a function. So this one over here, it calls this guy. So here we are just passing the middleware, which is a function, the pure, and in this function it'll get that value and then it just returns it, right? Because if I return function, so this is true. So since this returns the truth, it just calls this and returns it. And then now you have the handler function, right? And so now you have the middleware, right? Because it just returns it, right? Since it's a function, it just returns it. So this is the pure, so you can even call it pure, for example. So pure, right? And we can, so for now this one doesn't do anything. It just returns the pure middleware. So so you get the middleware, and then now you're calling the handler function. So you're calling this, you're calling the pure like this, pure, right? And then you're calling the handler function. Now let's see what the pure does, because I think we have a good idea as to what it does, right? I mean, we don't know what it does, but we know that how it works. We know that it takes a handler function and then it returns another handler function. So if you go to the middlewares and pure, and now we see that it gets a handler and then it returns a function, and then this function returns the appdb and the event vector. So this is the reference to what we see. So this is this thing over here, this guy over here, this db, right? And And look at this line over here, right? Here we're saying, here we're getting the reference to the old DB. If I call this, oh, app.db is coming from here. Okay. So we're calling the app.db. We are dereferencing it over here, and then we are passing it over here. Look, handler, app.db, and event vec. And it looks like we are passing the app.db when. So this is probably called when you're calling the dispatch function. So if you go to dispatch, it goes to router dispatch. So dispatch is, here you go. So you get the event vector, and then you put the event vector in the event chan. So here we have some core async stuff. And now if you go to this one, so this is the loop, right? This is the go loop. Go loop is coming from the core CLJS async macro. So this is a macro. And here what we're doing is we are getting the event vector from the event chan. So we have putting here, so we're taking it out. And then what we are doing is we are calling this over here, look, handler. So we have a function called handler, which is coming from handlers. Okay, so we have this function which takes the event vector, so increment in this example. And then look at that, app.db. So yeah, event ID. So we're getting the first in vector. So for example, this function could be receiving like this, right? The way how it, so it could be handle increments. So if I call this, look at this, it increments this value over here. Because what it does is it gets the event ID. So it calls the first in vector. So we get the event ID, and then we are calling this lookup handler. So if I do this and lookup handler, and now we get this function. So if you go and see what this lookup handler does, look at this. It is just calling this guy over here, and we are seeing if this ID function, which is the register, I guess, and then ID. So it should have two things. Oh, wait, it has a lot of things. So it has undo, redo, which are both middlewares, and then we also have the increment and init, which we assigned. And so what it tries to do is it tries to get the event ID, which is the increment. So this is what the lookup function does, right? This is what this guy does over here. And then you get the handler. And then this handler function, we are passing the app.db. And this app.db is coming from reframe.db. So let's go to reframe.db. And reframe.db is our, so we don't touch this directly. We don't have access to this directly. We access the content inside the DB using the subscription. So if I deref the app.db, you should have two things, right? I mean one thing. The counter map, right? So if I do this, reset app.db 0, it resets because it is referencing this value over here. So going back to the handler, so it just we are not dereferencing the app.db, we're just passing the app.db over here. So this is the handler function. So that's why if you go to the router and if we look at this handle function, handle, right? So this one returns the new value of the database, and and yeah, so going back to router. Let's go to the registrar. So here, right? So you have the let's go to the middleware, pure middleware. So here, pure middleware. So now we understand why we have to deref, because this value, right, we just saw, right, it's passed. Look at this, we're just passing this directly over here. Now had this been like this, right, now this wouldn't work. No, it doesn't work, because what I did here is I derefed it. Now to make it work, I can go to the handler, I can go to the middleware, and this should just be like this. And now this works. I guess not. Oh, so look at this one, because we are resetting, so this should be app.db, app.reframe.db as db, and then we can do db app.db. Identical. There you go. Okay, it's not working. Let's change it back to how it was. And let's change this to how it was. Refresh now. It works. Let's go back to it. What's wrong with this though? Let's see. There you go. Okay, so I think we have covered enough for this video. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.